Montana. December 1887. Caleb Thornton stood in his barn rifle in hand, staring at the small broken thing bleeding in his hay. The girl, maybe 9 years old, one eye scarred shut, clutched a bundle wrapped in blue cloth. A baby, dying from cold. She looked up at him with her one good eye and whispered 6 words that stopped his heart. "Sir, can you take him instead?" He'd buried his own son 6 years ago, swore he'd never let himself care again. But that night, staring at this child offering her life for her brothers, Caleb Thornton made a choice that would either redeem him or destroy everything he had left. Before we begin, if you're drawn to stories of courage, redemption, and the families we choose, please subscribe and follow this journey to the very end. And comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. The wind had been screaming for 3 days straight. Caleb Thornton pushed another forkful of hay into the stall, watching his mare stamp nervously. December in Montana's Blue Ridge territory meant storms that could bury a man standing upright. Meant frozen cattle and dead travelers found weeks later when the snow melted. Meant sensible folks stayed inside. That's why when Caleb heard the sound, his first instinct was to ignore it. A baby crying. He stopped mid-motion, hay suspended on the fork. Listened. Nothing but wind shrieking through the barn slats. He shook his head. 6 years of living alone did things to a man's mind. Made him hear voices in the wind. Made him see his dead son's face in shadows. Made him remember things better left buried. He went back to feeding the horses. Then he heard it again. Faint, desperate, real. Caleb dropped the pitchfork and grabbed his rifle off the wall. Whatever fool was out in this storm with an infant deserved whatever help he could give or whatever mercy a bullet could provide if they were too far gone. He stepped out into the white hell. The cold hit like a fist. 20 below easy. Maybe colder. The kind of cold that made your breath freeze in your lungs, made your fingers go numb in seconds, even with gloves. Through the horizontal snow, he saw movement. A shape. Small. Dragging itself through drifts that came up past its waist. Caleb squinted against the wind. Not an adult. A child. Carrying something. The figure fell. Disappeared completely into the snow. Caleb started forward, but before he'd taken 3 steps, the shape struggled back up. Kept coming toward his fence. Fell again. Got up again. Whatever was driving this child forward, it was stronger than the storm trying to kill it. Caleb vaulted the fence and ran. His boots punched through the crust with each step, but he was bigger, stronger. He reached the child just as it fell a 3rd time. Up close, he could see it was a girl, maybe 9 years old, wearing a dress that might have been nice once but was now little better than rags. Her face was blue-white with cold. Her lips had gone purple, but it was her eyes that stopped him. One was clear, desperately focused on him. The other was scarred, half-closed, damaged beyond repair. She clutched the bundle in her arms, the crying baby, and tried to speak. Her teeth chattered so hard the words came out broken. "Please, sir, barn." Caleb didn't ask questions. He scooped her up, baby and all, and ran back to the barn. Inside, away from the wind, he could hear how bad the baby's cries were. Weak, wet-sounding. Pneumonia, if Caleb had to guess. He'd heard that rattle before. In his own son's chest. The night Daniel died. Caleb shoved the memory down and laid the girl on a pile of hay near the small stove he kept burning. She didn't let go of the baby. Her frozen fingers were locked around the blue cloth. "Let me see him," Caleb said. She shook her head violently. "I'm not taking him. I need to check if he's alive." The girl's one good eye studied him, calculating, deciding if she could trust this stranger. Finally, slowly, she loosened her grip. Caleb unwrapped the cloth. A boy, maybe 6 months old. His lips were blue. His breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps. When Caleb touched the baby's chest, the skin was cold as snow. "How long you been out there?" he asked. The girl tried to answer, but her jaw locked up from shivering. Caleb grabbed blankets from his emergency supplies, wrapped the baby tight, held the small body against his own chest, using his body heat to warm the child. He'd done this before with calves born in winter storms. With his own son, that last terrible night. "What's his name?" Caleb asked, keeping his voice steady. Thomas," the girl managed. "His name, Thomas. And you?" "Rose. Fletcher?" "Fletcher." Caleb knew that name. Jacob Fletcher had run the biggest timber operation in 3 counties before his logging wagon went over a cliff last spring, left behind a widow pregnant with their second child. "Jacob Fletcher's kids," Caleb said. Rose nodded, still shaking so hard her teeth rattled. "Then who's taking care of you now?" Fear flooded the girl's one good eye. Raw animal fear. Our Uncle Vernon, sir." "Vernon Fletcher." Another nod. Caleb knew Vernon too. Everyone in Blue Ridge did. Owned the bank. Owned half the loans in town. Owned the sawmill and the land office. A respectable man. A pillar of the community. "So why aren't you with him?" Caleb asked quietly. Rose's mouth opened, closed. Her one good eye filled with tears. The baby in Caleb's arms let out a weak cry, then started coughing, the wet, rattling cough that meant fluid in the lungs. "I need to get him warm," Caleb said. "Need to get you both warm. Can you stand?" Rose tried. Her legs buckled. Caleb caught her with one arm, still holding the baby with the other. The girl weighed almost nothing. He could feel her ribs through the thin dress. He carried them both into the house. The heat from the fireplace hit Rose like a physical blow. She gasped, started shaking even harder. Caleb laid her on the rug in front of the fire, unwrapped the baby enough to check him properly. The child's breathing was getting worse. His color wasn't improving. Without medicine, he'd be dead by morning. "The baby," Rose whispered. Is he... "He's alive," Caleb said. "Barely. I need to ride to town. Get medicine." "No." Rose tried to sit up, panic in her voice. "No, sir, please, if you leave, if you go to town, Uncle Vernon will know. I don't care what your uncle knows. This baby needs medicine or he dies." Caleb stood, started pulling on his heavy coat. Rose grabbed his arm with frozen fingers. "Sir," she said, "please, can you take him instead of me?" Caleb froze. "What?" "Thomas, sir. Can you take Thomas?" Tears were streaming down her face now. "You don't have to keep me. I'm damaged goods. One eye don't work right. I ain't pretty or useful like other girls. But Thomas, he's perfect, sir. He just needs milk and warmth and somebody to care for him." She looked up at Caleb with that one desperate eye. "Please, sir, you don't have to take me. Just him. I can go back. I can take whatever Uncle Vernon does to me. But Thomas can't. Thomas is too small. Too perfect. Please, just save him." The words hung in the cold air. Caleb stared at this 9-year-old child offering her life for her brothers, calling herself damaged goods, believing she was worth less than nothing. Before he could answer, something hit his front door. Not knocking. Pounding. Heavy. Aggressive. Demanding. A man's voice cut through the howling wind outside. "Brennan, I know they're in there. Open this door." Rose's whole body went rigid. Her breathing stopped. The baby in Caleb's arms started crying again, and Rose's one good eye went wide with terror. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Uncle Vernon." The pounding got louder. "Brennan, those children are my legal wards. Send them out, or I'm coming in." Caleb looked down at Rose, shaking with more than cold now. Looked at the baby struggling to breathe in his arms. Then he looked at his rifle leaning against the wall by the door. In that moment, he had to decide. Open the door and hand them over to their legal guardian, or cross a line he couldn't uncross. Caleb picked up his rifle and walked to the door. He didn't open it. Not yet. "Storm's too dangerous, Fletcher," he called out, keeping his voice level. "Children are staying here tonight." Silence from the other side. The kind of silence that meant a man was calculating his next move. Then Vernon Fletcher's voice came again, lower, meaner. "The law says they're mine, Brennan. Law can wait till the snow stops. You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first." Caleb heard boots crunching through snow, a horse nickering, then the sound of hoofbeats riding away into the storm. When he turned back, Rose was staring at him with that one good eye, tears streaming down her face. "You shouldn't have done that, sir," she whispered. "Uncle Vernon, he don't forget. He don't forgive." "Neither do I," Caleb said. He set his rifle down and knelt beside her. "Now let's get you two warmed up proper. Then you're going to tell me everything. And I mean everything." The first thing Caleb did was tend to the baby. Thomas was in bad shape. That wet rattling in his chest meant pneumonia or close enough. Caleb had seen it before, knew what it meant if it wasn't treated fast. He heated milk on the stove. Not too hot, had to test it on his wrist first, make sure the temperature was right. His hands remembered the motion, even though his heart had been trying to forget it for 6 years. Rose watched him do it, and something shifted in her scarred face. "You've done this before," she said quietly. "Had a son once." Caleb didn't elaborate. Couldn't. The words would choke him. Rose didn't ask more. Just nodded like she understood what it meant when a man spoke about his children in past tense. Caleb got Thomas to take some milk. Not much, but enough. Wrapped him tight in warm blankets. Kept him close to the fire. The baby's color started improving just a little. His breathing was still rough, but not quite as desperate. The whole time Rose sat there in her wet frozen dress, not asking for anything for herself. "Girl," Caleb said, "you need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." "Thomas first, sir." "Thomas is being taken care of. You're next." "I don't want to be trouble." "You're already trouble," Caleb said, but his voice wasn't harsh. "Might as well be warm trouble." He found some of his late wife's clothes in a trunk he hadn't opened in years. A simple dress. Too big for the child, but dry and warm. He handed it to Rose and turned his back while she changed. When he looked again, she was drowning in the fabric. Sleeves hanging past her hands, hem dragging on the floor. But she stood there with her chin up, trying to look dignified despite it all. Reminded him of Margaret. That same stubborn pride, even when the world was kicking her down. "You hungry?" Caleb asked. "If you've got something to spare, sir, I wouldn't refuse it." Caleb made stew. Venison from a deer he'd shot 2 weeks ago. Potatoes and carrots from his root cellar. Simple frontier food, but hot and filling. When he set the bowl in front of Rose, she looked at it like he'd given her a feast fit for kings. Then she did something that told Caleb everything he needed to know about this child's life. She broke her bread in half and tucked one piece in the pocket of the too-big dress. "What are you saving that for?" Caleb asked. "Tomorrow, sir, in case there ain't more." Caleb's chest went tight. "There will be more, Rose. You don't need to hoard food here." She looked at him with that one good eye, and he could see she didn't quite believe him. This was a child who'd learned not to trust promises. Rose ate slowly, carefully, like she was afraid the food might disappear if she ate too fast. Caleb pretended not to notice. Just kept the fire going and checked on Thomas every few minutes. When Rose finished, she set the bowl down and looked at Caleb. "Sir," she said, "I need to tell you something about Uncle Vernon, about why we ran." "I'm listening." Rose took a breath. Her hands twisted in the fabric of the dress. "Papa didn't die in an accident," she said quietly. "I saw Uncle Vernon the night before, in the equipment shed. He was doing something to Papa's wagon, filing the brake cables, making them look worn, but cutting them almost through." Caleb went very still. You saw this? Yes, sir. I couldn't sleep that night. I went outside to use the outhouse, and I saw lamplight in the shed. I peeked through a crack in the wall and I saw him, filing and filing. Then he put the tools away and left. Did he see you? No, sir. I was real quiet. Did you tell anyone? Rose's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I tried to tell Mama, but she said I was having nightmares. Said Uncle Vernon would never do such a thing. He was Papa's brother. Family. She looked at Caleb with tears in her good eye. Next day, Papa's wagon went over Eagle's Drop. Brake failure. He died on the rocks at the bottom. Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. What about your mother? Mama was pregnant with Thomas. She started having trouble, bleeding. Uncle Vernon said he'd fetch the doctor, but... Rose's voice broke. The doctor came too late. Hours too late. And when he finally arrived, he said someone had told him the wrong address. Sent him to the old Fletcher place instead of our house. Who gave him the wrong address? Uncle Vernon's housekeeper. But she said Uncle Vernon told her where to send the doctor. Jesus Christ. Mama died having Thomas, Rose whispered. Bled out because help came too late. And I heard Uncle Vernon talking to his lawyer after the funeral. He said now the children wouldn't be a problem. Said he'd have full control of Papa's shares in the timber company. Said he just had to wait a decent interval, then he could send us away, and nobody would question it. Caleb leaned back in his chair, processing. Vernon Fletcher had murdered his own brother for a timber company, had let his sister-in-law bleed to death, was planning to dispose of 2 orphaned children, and the whole town thought he was a respectable man. Why didn't you tell the marshal? Caleb asked. I tried, sir. I went to Marshal Cooper's office 2 weeks ago, told him what I saw. What did he say? Rose's voice went flat. He said I was a traumatized child making up stories. Said grief does strange things to young minds. Then he walked me back to Uncle Vernon's house and told my uncle I'd been confused and emotional. What did Vernon do? Rose touched her scarred eye. He waited till the marshal left. Then he said, I was an ungrateful liar. Said I was spreading slander about the man who'd taken me in out of Christian charity. Then he pushed me. I fell against the doorframe. My eye hit the corner. She looked at Caleb. That's when I knew he'd kill us, sir. Maybe not quick. Maybe slow like he did with Mama. But he'd do it. Because we know. And because as long as we're alive, he doesn't really own what was Papa's. Caleb stood and walked to the window, looked out at the storm still raging. When did you run? 3 days ago. Uncle Vernon said he'd made arrangements. Said we were going on the orphan train heading east. 200 miles to some institution that would properly care for foundlings. In this weather? Yes, sir. I told him Thomas was too sick, that the journey would kill him. Uncle Vernon said... Her voice cracked. He said it didn't matter. Said Thomas probably wouldn't survive anyway, and it was better it happened on the train than in his house. Less questions that way. Caleb's hands curled into fists. So you ran? Yes, sir. That night. I waited till Uncle Vernon went to bed, then I wrapped Thomas up warm as I could, and I walked. Took me 3 days to find your place. I remembered Papa saying once that Caleb Thornton's ranch was the furthest north up past Eagle's Ridge. I just kept walking. 12 miles. Through a blizzard. A 9-year-old girl carrying a baby. Why here? Caleb asked. Why me? Rose looked down at her hands. Papa used to say you were the only honest man in Blue Ridge. Said you didn't owe nobody nothing. Said if a man ever needed help and couldn't pay for it, you were the one to ask. Caleb turned to look at her. Your father said that... Yes, sir. After your wife and son died, Papa wanted to help. Wanted to bring you food or firewood. But he said you wouldn't accept charity. Said you were too proud. But he also said... She met Caleb's gaze. He said you were the kind of man who'd do the right thing even when it cost you everything. The words hit Caleb like a punch to the chest. Jacob Fletcher had been wrong. Caleb wasn't that man anymore. Hadn't been for 6 years. He'd let himself go cold, let himself stop caring about anything beyond his own property. But looking at Rose, this broken, brave child who'd walked through hell to save her brother Caleb, felt something crack open inside him. Something he'd thought died with Margaret and Daniel. "Rose," he said quietly, "I need to ride to town, get medicine for Thomas. He won't make it through the night without it." Rose stood up, panic flashing across her face. "But Uncle Vernon." "I don't care about Vernon. I care about your brother not dying in my house." "But if you go to town, if people see you with Thomas, then they see me." Caleb pulled on his coat. "I'm not letting this baby die because I'm worried about what Vernon Fletcher thinks." He started toward the door, then stopped, turned back. "Rose, when I come back, you and Thomas are staying here. I don't know for how long. I don't know how we'll make it legal. But you're not going back to Vernon. You understand?" Rose's one good eye filled with tears. "But I told you, sir. I'm damaged. I can't see right. I can't work proper. I'm not worth—" "Stop," Caleb said, his voice sharp enough to cut. "I don't want to hear you talk about yourself that way. You walked 12 miles through a blizzard carrying your brother. You stood between him and death. That makes you worth more than every respectable person in Blue Ridge put together." He opened the door. "I'll be back before dawn. Keep the fire going. Keep Thomas warm. And Rose." "Yes, sir." "You did good. Your father would be proud." Then Caleb Thornton walked out into the storm. The ride to Blue Ridge took 2 hours that felt like 20. The wind tried to rip Caleb off his horse. The snow was so thick he could barely see his mare's ears. Twice he thought he'd lose the trail completely. But he kept going, because a baby was dying. And Caleb had already failed to save one child. He wouldn't fail another. By the time he reached town, his face was numb and his hands were frozen to the reins. He rode straight to Doc Harrison's house and pounded on the door. Doc Harrison answered in his nightshirt, lamp in hand, looking annoyed. "Caleb, what in the hell?" "I need medicine. Infant with pneumonia. Wet cough, blue lips, struggling to breathe." Doc Harrison's annoyance vanished. "Come in." Caleb stepped inside while Doc Harrison moved quickly through his medical supplies. The old doctor packed bottles and powders into a leather bag, talking as he worked. "This infant got a name. Thomas. Thomas who—" Caleb hesitated. If he said Fletcher word would get back to Vernon before dawn. But lying to Doc Harrison seemed wrong somehow. "Thomas Fletcher," Caleb said quietly. Doc Harrison's hands stopped moving. He turned and looked at Caleb with sharp eyes. "Vernon Fletcher's ward." "That's right. Vernon know you got his kid." "He knows." Doc Harrison studied Caleb's face for a long moment. Then he went back to packing the bag. "There's talk in town," the doctor said carefully, "about Vernon, about how Jacob really died, about how Grace Fletcher bled out while the doc was sent to the wrong address." "You hear who gave that wrong address?" "I hear a lot of things, Caleb. Question is what a man does with what he hears." Doc Harrison handed Caleb the bag. "Give the baby half a teaspoon of this powder mixed with warm milk every 4 hours. Keep him warm and dry. And Caleb—" "Yeah. Whatever you're doing, be careful. Vernon Fletcher's got friends, got money, got influence. He's not the kind of man you want as an enemy." "Too late for that," Caleb said. He paid the doctor and rode back into the storm. Dean. When Caleb pushed through his door 3 hours later, half frozen and exhausted, he found Rose exactly where he'd left her, sitting by the fire holding Thomas, both of them wrapped in blankets. The fire was still burning strong. She'd kept it fed the whole time. "You came back," Rose whispered, like she hadn't quite believed he would. "Told you I would." Caleb mixed the medicine according to Doc Harrison's instructions and got Thomas to swallow it. The baby fought at first, but Rose sang softly to him, and he calmed enough to take the dose. Within an hour, Thomas's breathing started to ease. His color improved. His coughing lessened. Rose watched her brother's chest rise and fall, and finally, she let herself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears rolling down her scarred cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, sir." "Caleb," he said. "You can call me Caleb." She looked up at him surprised. "That ain't proper, sir." "Proper's got nothing to do with it. We're past formalities now." Rose was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Why are you helping us, Caleb?" It was the first time she'd used his name, and it sounded strange in her small, careful voice. Caleb was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "Because somebody should have helped mine," he said finally. "My son, Daniel. He got sick like Thomas. Winter fever. I rode for medicine just like tonight. But I was too late. He died while I was gone." Rose's hand reached out and touched his arm. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Me too." They sat there in silence, the fire crackling, the storm still howling outside. Then Rose asked, "What happened to your wife?" "Margaret died 6 months after Daniel. Heartbreak," Doc Harrison said. "But I think she died because she couldn't stand to look at me anymore. Couldn't stand to see the man who'd failed to save their son. That wasn't your fault. Maybe not. But it felt like it. Still does." Rose was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mama told me once that God breaks our hearts so he can fit more love inside." Caleb looked at her surprised. "Your mama said that?" "Yes, sir. Caleb, I mean. She said it after Papa died. Said her heart was broken, but that just meant there was more room for me and Thomas now." Caleb felt something crack open wider in his chest. "Your mama was a wise woman." She was. They sat there until the storm finally started to break. Through the window, Caleb could see the first hints of dawn turning the sky gray. "Rose," he said, "when the sun comes up, Vernon's going to come back. Probably with Marshall Cooper. Probably with legal papers saying you're his wards, and I'm harboring you illegally." Rose's face went pale. "What are we going to do?" Caleb looked at this brave, broken child and made a decision that would change everything. "We're going to fight," he said. The sun came up cold and pale over Blue Ridge. Caleb stood at his window, watching the trail that led down from his ranch, waiting. Rose sat by the fire with Thomas in her arms. The baby was breathing easier now, his color better, but he was still weak, still vulnerable. "How long do you think before they come?" Rose asked. "Not long." Caleb checked his rifle, made sure it was loaded. He wasn't planning to shoot anyone, but he wanted Vernon to know he was willing to if it came to it. Rose watched him with her one good eye. "You really think we can fight him? Uncle Vernon owns half the town. He's got money and lawyers and we've got the truth," Caleb said. "Sometimes that's enough. And when it's not..." Caleb turned to look at her. "Then we've got stubbornness. And I'm a stubborn man, Rose." She almost smiled at that. They didn't have to wait long. Around mid-morning, Caleb heard horses coming up the trail. He looked out and counted 6 riders. Vernon Fletcher in the lead, wearing his expensive coat and riding his expensive horse. Next to him, Marshal Henry Cooper, looking tired and cold and not particularly happy about being dragged up a mountain. Behind them, 4 men Caleb didn't recognize. Rough types, the kind you hired when you wanted muscle, not conversation. "Stay inside," Caleb told Rose. "Keep quiet. Let me handle this." "But, Rose, trust me." She nodded and moved back from the window, clutching Thomas tight. Caleb stepped out onto his porch, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. Casual, unthreatening, but ready. The riders stopped 20 feet from his house. Vernon dismounted first, brushing snow off his coat like he was arriving at a social event, not a confrontation. "Mr. Thornton," Vernon said, his voice smooth as oil. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Morning, Vernon," Caleb said. "Marshal." Marshal Cooper tipped his hat but didn't smile. "Caleb, we need to talk about those children." "Nothing to talk about." They're safe, they're warm, and the baby's getting medicine. That's all that matters. Vernon stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from inside his coat. This is a legal guardianship document, Mr. Thornton, signed by Judge Morrison himself. It states clearly that I am the legal guardian of Rose and Thomas Fletcher. You are harboring minors against their legal guardian's wishes. Caleb didn't look at the paper. Legal guardian, he repeated. That's an interesting phrase. Tell me, Vernon, does a legal guardian usually send his wards out on an orphan train in the middle of a blizzard when one of them's dying from pneumonia? Vernon's smile didn't waver. I was making arrangements for their proper care. There are institutions far better equipped to handle orphan children than a ranch run by an unmarried man. Institutions 200 miles away where nobody would check on them. Institutions with trained staff and medical facilities. Institutions where they'd conveniently disappear and you'd have full control of your brother's timber shares. The smile finally cracked. That's slander, Mr. Thornton. It's a question. Marshal Cooper held up his hand. Caleb, I understand you took the children in during the storm. That's charitable. But Mr. Fletcher here has legal standing. The law's clear on this. Is it? Caleb looked at the marshal. How clear is the law when a 9-year-old girl walks 12 miles through a blizzard because she's terrified of her legal guardian? Children run away sometimes, Vernon said smoothly. They're emotional creatures. They don't always understand what's best for them. They understand enough to know when they're being hurt. Vernon's face went hard. Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Thornton? I'm saying Rose has a scarred eye and a story about how she got it. I'm saying Jacob Fletcher died in a brake failure that might not have been accidental. I'm saying Grace Fletcher bled out while the doctor was sent to the wrong address. The 4 hired men shifted in their saddles. Marshal Cooper's expression changed. Vernon's face went white, then red. Those are serious accusations, the marshal said quietly. You got proof. I've got a witness. A traumatized child who's been filled with poison by a stranger, Vernon snapped. Marshal, this man has clearly manipulated these children against me. I demand you retrieve my wards immediately. Marshal Cooper looked between them, clearly weighing his options. The law versus common sense. Legal papers versus a child's terror. Finally, he sighed. Caleb, I need to talk to the girl. Just talk. That's reasonable, isn't it? Caleb hesitated. Letting the marshal inside meant exposing Rose to questioning, but refusing would make him look like he had something to hide. Marshal comes in, Caleb said. Caleb. Vernon stays out. Those are my children, Vernon protested. They're wards, not property, and until the marshal says different, they're under my roof, which means I decide who enters. Vernon's face went purple, but he stayed put. He knew if he pushed it, he'd have to go through Caleb. And despite all his money and influence, Vernon Fletcher wasn't that kind of brave. Caleb stepped aside and let Marshal Cooper into the house. Rose stood by the fire holding Thomas. When she saw the marshal, she went very still. Miss Rose, Cooper said gently, removing his hat. I need to ask you some questions. Rose nodded barely. Your uncle says you ran away. That true? Yes, sir. Why? Rose looked at Caleb. He nodded. Tell him the truth. Rose took a breath. Uncle Vernon was going to send us away. On the orphan train. East to some institution. I told him Thomas was too sick. That the journey would kill him. He said it didn't matter. Marshal Cooper frowned. He said that those exact words. Yes, sir. He said Thomas probably wouldn't survive anyway, and it was better if it happened on the train than in his house. Said there'd be less questions that way. The marshal's jaw tightened. That's a serious claim, Rose. It's true, sir. I heard him say it. Cooper pulled out a small notebook and pencil. Started writing. Tell me about your eye, Rose. How'd that happen? Rose's hand moved to her scarred eye. Caleb could see her fighting the instinct to lie to protect herself with the story she'd been forced to tell. "I fell," she whispered. "Fell how?" "Down the stairs." But her voice was flat, practiced, the voice of someone who'd said the same lie 100 times. "Rose," Caleb said quietly. "The truth." Rose looked at him, then at the marshal, then down at Thomas in her arms. "Uncle Vernon pushed me," she said, her voice barely audible. "I dropped a plate. He got angry. He pushed me, and I hit the door frame and my eye. My eye." She was crying now, the words coming faster. "And Papa's accident wasn't an accident. I saw Uncle Vernon that night. The night before Papa died. I saw him in the equipment shed. He was filing the brake cables on Papa's wagon, filing them down so they'd look worn, but they were really cut. And the next day Papa went over Eagle's Drop and died, and I tried to tell Mama, but she didn't believe me. And then Mama died too, because the doctor came too late because someone gave him the wrong address." "Enough!" Vernon's voice cut through the house like a whip. He'd pushed past the hired men and stood in the doorway, now his face twisted with rage. "That child is hysterical. She's making up stories because this man has filled her head with lies. Marshal, I demand you remove these children from his influence immediately." The whole room went silent, except for Rose's sobbing. Marshal Cooper looked at her, then at Vernon, then at Caleb. Caleb could see him weighing it. A child's accusation versus a respectable man's reputation. No proof, no witnesses except a 9-year-old girl with a scarred eye and a dead baby brother in her arms. The marshal closed his notebook. "Mr. Fletcher," he said slowly, "these are serious allegations. From a traumatized child. Maybe, but they're specific, detailed, and that eye didn't scar itself. She fell. You said she fell downstairs. She says you pushed her into a doorframe. Those are two different stories." Vernon's mouth tightened. "She's confused. Grief does strange things to children. Does it make them walk 12 miles through a blizzard carrying a dying baby?" The marshal looked at Vernon, and Caleb saw something shift in the lawman's eyes. Not quite belief, but not quite doubt either. The first crack in Vernon's armor. "I think," Cooper said carefully, "we need to bring this before Judge Morrison. Let him sort it out proper." "That could take weeks," Vernon protested. "Then it takes weeks." "Marshal, I have legal rights. And that girl just accused you of murder." Cooper's voice hardened. "Now I'm not saying she's telling the truth, but I'm not saying she's lying either. And until we know which these children stay put." Vernon turned on Caleb, his eyes cold with calculation. "This isn't over, Thornton." "I reckon it's not. I have friends, influence. You can't keep me from what's legally mine." "We'll see about that." Vernon stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out. His hired men followed. Marshal Cooper lingered. "Caleb," he said quietly, "you know what you just did? Made an enemy. Made a dangerous enemy. Vernon Fletcher owns half the loans in this territory. He can make life real difficult for folks who cross him. Then I reckon my life's about to get difficult." Cooper shook his head. "You're either brave or stupid. Maybe both." "Probably both," Caleb admitted. The marshal looked at Rose still crying by the fire. "For what it's worth," Cooper said, "I hope you're right about him, because if that girl's telling the truth, we got a murderer walking free. Then I guess we better prove it." After the marshal left, Caleb sat down next to Rose. She was rocking Thomas, humming that same tune she'd been singing the night before. When she saw Caleb, she stopped. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I told. He said if I ever told anyone you did the right thing. But what if nobody believes me? The marshal believed you enough to make Vernon wait. That's a start." Rose looked up at him with her one good eye. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for the judge to make his circuit. Could be a few weeks." "And until then?" Until then, you and Thomas stay here. We work the ranch. We keep our heads down. And we figure out how to prove what Vernon did." Rose was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "Why are you doing this? Really? You could hand us over right now and Vernon would leave you alone. You could go back to your quiet life." Caleb thought about that. About the 6 years he'd spent alone building things for no reason, pretending he was still alive, when really he'd been dead inside. "Because I'm tired of being quiet," he said. "And because your father was right. I am the kind of man who'll do the right thing even when it costs me everything. Just took me 6 years to remember it." Rose reached out and took his hand. Her small scarred fingers wrapped around his rough, calloused ones. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb squeezed her hand. "You're welcome, daughter." The word slipped out before he could stop it. Daughter. He hadn't called anyone that in 6 years. Rose's eyes went wide. Then she smiled, small and fragile and real. And Caleb felt something in his chest that he'd thought was dead forever. Something warm. Something like hope. Over the next 3 days, they settled into a routine. Caleb taught Rose how to gather eggs from the chickens without spooking them, how to knead bread dough until it had just the right spring, how to brush down the horses and check their hooves for stones. Rose was a quick learner, watched everything Caleb did with that one sharp eye, remembered it all, and she was gentle with the animals in a way that made Caleb's chest tight, reminded him of Daniel, who'd loved the horses more than anything. Thomas got stronger. His color came back. His breathing cleared. He even started laughing, this small baby giggle that filled the empty spaces in Caleb's house like nothing had in years. For 3 days they lived like a real family. Caleb told himself maybe they'd gotten lucky. Maybe Vernon would wait for the judge. Maybe they'd have time to build a case, gather witnesses, prove what that man had done. He should have known better. The first sign came on the 3rd night. Caleb's dog started barking around midnight. Not the usual bark at a coyote or raccoon, but something different. Anxious. Warning. Caleb went to the window and looked out at the moonlit snow. Didn't see anything, but the dog wouldn't settle. Kept pacing and whining until near dawn. "What's got him spooked?" Rose asked, coming out with Thomas in her arms. "Don't know. Probably just a bear waking up early." But Caleb didn't believe that, and from the look on Rose's face, neither did she. The next morning, Caleb rode down to check his fence line. Found tracks, boot prints, at least 4 different men circling his property. They'd come right up to the edge of his land, stopped, then headed back toward town. Scouting, counting exits, planning something. When Caleb got back to the house, Sarah Brennan was there. She'd ridden up from town with a basket of supplies, flour, sugar, salt, pork. But the look on her face told Caleb she hadn't come just to be neighborly. "Caleb," she said, pulling him aside while Rose was occupied with Thomas, "you need to know what's happening in town." "I'm listening." "Vernon's been talking, spreading stories, says you're an unmarried man living alone with a young girl, that it's not proper, that who knows what kind of influences you're exposing her to." Caleb's jaw clenched. He's suggesting all kinds of things, and people are listening, Caleb. He's called in loans, threatened businesses, reminded folks who holds their mortgages. He's turning the whole town against you. Let him turn. I don't care what they think. You should care. Sarah's voice dropped low. Because last night at the saloon, he was buying drinks for some rough types. Men from out of territory. The kind you hire when you want something done that can't be traced back to you. Caleb felt something cold settle in his gut. How many men? 4 that I saw, maybe more, armed to the teeth. They stood there in silence, both knowing what that meant. Vernon had tried the legal way and failed. Now he was going to try another way. You could leave, Sarah said quietly. Take the children and head west. Change your names. Start over somewhere he can't find you. Run, you mean? Survive, I mean. Caleb looked through the window at Rose, watching her make faces at Thomas to get him to smile. She'd started to relax these past few days, started to believe she might actually be safe. "I built this ranch with my own hands," Caleb said. "Every fence post, every board in that barn. It's all I got left of the life I had with Margaret and Daniel. I'm not running." "Then you better be ready to fight." "I'm always ready to fight." Sarah put her hand on his arm. "Caleb, there's brave and then there's foolish. You're one man. He's got money, influence, and hired guns. You can't win this." "Maybe not, but I can make damn sure he doesn't win either." Sarah shook her head sadly, then climbed back on her horse. Before she rode off, she turned back. "There's some of us in town who know what Vernon really is," she said. "Not many, but some. If you need help, send word." But they both knew how that would go. Vernon owned this town, owned these people. When push came to shove, they'd look the other way. That's what folks did when they were scared. They survived. Caleb couldn't blame them for it, but he couldn't count on them either. That night the temperature dropped hard, the kind of cold that made your breath freeze in your lungs, made the trees crack like rifle shots. Caleb was sitting by the fire cleaning his guns when he heard it. Horses. Multiple horses. Moving slow and deliberate up the mountain trail. He went to the window. At first he couldn't see anything but darkness and stars. Then he saw them. Lights. Flickering through the trees. Torches. At least 6 of them, maybe more, winding their way up toward his ranch. "Rose," Caleb said quietly. "Take Thomas and go to the root cellar." She was on her feet instantly, baby clutched to her chest. "What's happening?" "Just do what I say. Get in that cellar. Close the door. Don't come out till I tell you it's safe." "Caleb." "Now, girl." She ran. Caleb heard the cellar door creak open, heard her footsteps on the wooden stairs, heard it slam shut. Good. The root cellar was underground, stone-lined, fireproof. Because Caleb had a feeling fire was exactly what was coming. He loaded his rifle, his shotgun, his pistol, checked his ammunition. Not enough to fight off 6 men if they were determined, but enough to make them think twice. The torches got closer. Caleb could see them clearly now. See the men carrying them. Rough-looking types just like Sarah had said. Hired guns with hard eyes and harder hearts. And riding in the middle of them, staying well back from the front line, was Vernon Fletcher. They stopped about 50 yards from Caleb's house, formed a semicircle. The torches cast crazy shadows on the snow, made everything look like hell had frozen over and come calling. One of the hired guns stepped forward. Big man's scarred face, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. "Caleb Thornton," he called out. "We know you got the girl in there. Send her out and we'll leave peaceful." Caleb opened the door just wide enough to show his rifle barrel. "She's not coming out. There's 6 of us and 1 of you, old man." 6 targets, Caleb said. "I only need 3 bullets to make this unprofitable for the rest of you." Silence. Caleb could almost hear them calculating odds. They were getting paid to do a job, sure. But was it enough to die for? That's when Vernon rode forward a bit, staying carefully behind his hired muscle. "Mr. Thornton," his voice was smooth as silk. "Let's be reasonable men about this. Those children are legally mine. I'm simply reclaiming my property." "She's not property," Caleb shouted back. "Neither is that baby. Not while I'm breathing." "Then perhaps," Vernon said, and Caleb could hear the smile in his voice, "we should do something about your breathing." One of the hired guns threw his torch. It arced through the air like a shooting star. Landed on Caleb's barn roof. The hay inside caught instantly. Flames exploded upward into the night sky. Caleb's horses screamed. He ran toward the barn without thinking. Forgot about the men with guns. Forgot about everything except those animals trapped inside. But he'd only made it 3 steps when a bullet cracked past his head. Splintered the doorframe. "Next one won't miss," the scarred man yelled. Caleb stopped, watched his barn burn, watched the horses finally kick their way out through the back wall running wild-eyed into the snow. At least they were free. But everything else, the hay, the equipment, the tack 5 years of building was going up in flames. "Now," Vernon called out, "are you going to be sensible, or does the house burn next?" Caleb stood there in the doorway, rifle in his hands, watching the fire paint the snow orange and red. Beneath his feet, under the floorboards, he could hear Rose crying softly in the root cellar. "You can burn every building on this mountain," Caleb said. "The answer's still no." Another torch flew through the air. This one was headed straight for his house. That second torch never hit Caleb's house. A rifle shot cracked through the night, and the torch exploded in midair, scattering burning embers that rained down harmless into the snow. Caleb spun around, trying to figure where the shot came from. That's when he saw them. Riders pouring out of the tree line from 3 directions. 20 men, maybe more, carrying their own torches and rifles. At the front rode Miguel Santos Foreman, who'd worked for Jacob Fletcher before the accident. Behind him was Sarah Brennan from the general store, Doc Harrison, and a whole crowd of townspeople Caleb had barely spoken to in 6 years. "Drop your weapons!" Miguel shouted at Vernon's hired guns. "Now!" The hired men looked at each other, then at Vernon, calculating new odds. 6 against 1 had been good numbers. 6 against 25 was suicide. Their guns hit the snow. "This is outrageous," Vernon sputtered. "These people have no authority." "We got every authority," Miguel said, riding right up to him. "We're citizens of this territory, and we witnessed you committing arson and attempted murder. Marshal Reeves is going to be real interested in that." "You wouldn't dare!" Sarah leveled her rifle at him. "My husband died in one of your accidents, Vernon. I've stayed quiet for 3 years. I'm not staying quiet anymore." Caleb stood there in shock, watching his barn burn, watching the town he thought had abandoned him surround Vernon and his thugs like wolves on a wounded elk. Sarah rode up beside Caleb. "Told you there were some of us who knew what he really was," she said quietly. "Just took somebody brave enough to stand up first before the rest of us found our courage." By the time Marshal Cooper arrived, Sarah's son had ridden to fetch him. Vernon and his hired guns were tied up in Caleb's yard like Christmas packages. The marshal took one look at the burning barn, the armed townspeople, and Vernon's red face, and let out a long sigh. "This just gets better and better," he muttered. It took till dawn to sort everything out. Statements were taken, witnesses recorded, charges filed. Vernon was arrested for arson, attempted murder, and a half-dozen other crimes. His hired guns turned on him faster than rats, leaving a sinking ship, confessing to everything he'd paid them to do. By the time the sun rose, Vernon Fletcher was headed to jail in iron shackles. "You got lucky tonight," Marshal Cooper said to Caleb as the wagon carrying Vernon rolled away. "But this isn't over. He'll get a lawyer, make bail, fight this in court, and he's still got those guardianship papers." "Then we'll fight him in court too," Caleb said. The marshal looked at Caleb for a long moment. "You really want these kids that bad?" Caleb thought about Rose crying in the root cellar, about Thomas's laugh, about the way his empty house had started to feel like a home again. "Yeah," he said, "I really do." After everyone left, after the barn had burned down to smoldering embers, Caleb opened the root cellar door. Rose was sitting on the bottom step rocking Samuel, singing to him soft. When she saw Caleb, she stopped. "Is it over?" she whispered. "For now." She climbed up, and they stood together in the gray dawn light, looking at what was left of the barn. Just a skeleton of blackened beams and ash. "I'm sorry," Rose said quietly. "This is all my fault. If we'd never come here, then I'd still be alone," Caleb interrupted. "Living in an empty house, building things for no reason, pretending I was still alive when really I'd been dead inside for 6 years. Rose looked up at him with that one clear eye. "You really mean that?" "I really mean that." She set Thomas down in his basket, then did something that nearly broke Caleb. She reached out and hugged him, quick and fierce, then pulled back like she was embarrassed. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Caleb put his hand on her head, smoothed down her tangled hair. "You're welcome, daughter." They stood like that for a long minute, not saying anything, just holding on and watching the smoke rise from the ruins. 2 days later, Caleb got a visitor he wasn't expecting. Chief Grey Wolf of the Blackfoot Nation rode up to the ranch alone, carrying no weapons, showing he came in peace. Caleb had met him a few times over the years. They'd always gotten along well enough, respected each other's boundaries. "Caleb Thornton," Grey Wolf said, dismounting, "I heard what happened here, the fire, the children. News travels fast. Some news travels on the wind." Grey Wolf looked at Rose, who was peeking out from behind Caleb. "Come here, child." Rose hesitated, then stepped forward. The chief studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have your grandmother's eyes, both of them, even the one that doesn't see." Rose's mouth fell open. "You knew my grandmother." Morning Dove was her name. Blackfoot woman who married a white trader. Your mother was their daughter. Grey Wolf looked at Caleb. "Did you know the children have tribal blood?" "No," Caleb admitted. "But what difference does it make?" "All the difference." Grey Wolf's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. "Under treaty law, children with tribal blood can claim tribal jurisdiction, especially in custody matters." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Meaning Vernon Fletcher's guardianship papers are white man's law, but these children can choose to be recognized by the tribe, and if they do, their custody falls under our authority, not the territorial courts. "And what would your tribe decide?" "We'd hold a hearing, ask the children what they want, ask you what you offer, make our judgment based on our traditions, not white men's property laws." Grey Wolf fixed Caleb with a steady gaze. "In our nation, children belong to those who protect them and care for them, not to those who share blood, but offer no love." Rose grabbed Caleb's hand, squeezed it tight. "Is that what you want?" Caleb asked her quietly. "To claim your tribal heritage." "If it means staying with you," Rose said, "then yes." Grey Wolf nodded. "Then it's settled. I'll file the papers with the territorial judge. In 3 days we'll hold a traditional hearing. If you pass our test, Caleb Thornton, the children are yours. No white man's court can overturn it." "What kind of test?" "The trial of 3 questions." Grey Wolf's eyes gleamed. "We'll see what kind of man you really are." After the chief left, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Real hope. That feeling lasted exactly 4 hours. That's when Sarah came riding up again, this time at full gallop, her horse covered in sweat despite the cold. "Caleb," she shouted before she'd even dismounted. "Vernon made bail." "What? How?" "Judge let him out this morning. He's got friends in high places, called in favors." Sarah was breathing hard. "And Caleb, he knows about the tribal hearing. I heard him talking to his lawyer. They're going to fight it. Going to claim the children aren't really tribal, that there's no documentation, that it's all a trick to get around white man's law." "Can they do that?" "I don't know, but that's not the worst of it." Sarah looked scared now, really scared. "He hired more men, different ones this time, from down south, the kind that don't ask questions and don't leave witnesses." She paused, glancing at Rose, who stood in the doorway. I heard him say if he can't have the children legal, he'll make sure nobody can have them at all." The hope that had been building in Caleb's chest turned cold and heavy. "How long do I have?" 3 days till the tribal hearing. "But Caleb," her voice dropped to a whisper, "I don't think he's going to wait that long. I think he's coming tonight." Caleb looked at his burned barn at his ranch that had become a battlefield, at Rose standing in the doorway holding her baby brother. "Then tonight," he said, "we'll be ready." But as he said it, Caleb couldn't help wondering how you get ready to fight a man who's got nothing left to lose and everything to gain by your death. Caleb spent that afternoon preparing for a siege, moved Rose and Thomas to the strongest part of the cabin, the corner where two stone walls met. Least likely to catch fire, stacked supplies there, water, food, blankets, ammunition, positioned his rifles at windows facing different directions. If Vernon's men came, he'd make them pay for every inch. Rose watched him work, her one good eye tracking every movement. "You're scared," she said quietly. "I'm careful. There's a difference." "You think he's going to come tonight, don't you?" Caleb didn't answer right away, just kept loading cartridges into the rifle. "Caleb." He stopped, looked at her. "Yeah, I think he's coming tonight." Rose was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "If something happens to you." "Nothing's going to happen to me." "But if it does?" "Rose." Caleb set down the rifle and knelt so they were eye to eye. "If things go bad, if they get past me and into this cabin, you take Thomas and you run. There's a trail out the back through the pine grove. It'll take you to Chief Gray Wolf's territory. You follow that trail. You don't look back. You don't stop. You understand? I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to." "No." Her voice was firm now, stubborn. "You didn't leave me when things got hard. I'm not leaving you either." Caleb looked at this little girl, 9 years old, half blind, clutching her baby brother standing there, telling him she wouldn't abandon him. He realized something then. She'd already saved him once. When she came walking through that blizzard, she'd saved him from a life of being dead inside. Maybe it was time he trusted her to help save them both. "All right," Caleb said. "We stand together." Rose smiled. Small, scared, but real. Then she reached out and hugged him quick and fierce before pulling back. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Caleb opened his mouth to answer, but that's when he heard it. Horses. Multiple horses. Coming up the trail. "Here we go," Caleb thought, reaching for his rifle. But then he heard something unexpected. A voice calling out, "Thornton, don't shoot, it's Miguel." Caleb went to the door cautiously, rifle ready. Sure enough, Miguel Santos was riding up, and behind him, Caleb counted 12 more riders, men from the logging crews, men he barely knew. "What's going on?" Caleb called out. Miguel dismounted. "We heard Vernon made bail. Heard he's planning something tonight, so we came to help." "Help how?" "However you need." Miguel gestured to the men behind him. "Every one of us worked for Jacob Fletcher. Every one of us knows Vernon killed him. We should have said something 6 months ago. We didn't. We were cowards." One by one the men dismounted. Caleb recognized some of them. Juan the saw operator. Big Tom, who could carry a full log on his shoulders. Young Willie, who couldn't have been more than 19. "We'll stand watch," Miguel said. "In shifts. If Vernon's men come, they'll have to go through all of us." Caleb didn't know what to say. For 6 years he'd lived alone. Kept everyone at arm's length. Convinced himself he didn't need nobody. And here were a dozen men ready to risk their lives for children they barely knew. Just because it was the right thing to do. "I can't pay you," Caleb said finally. "Didn't ask for pay," Miguel replied. "Some things you do because they need doing. This is one of them." As the men set up a perimeter around the cabin, another rider came up the trail. Doc Harrison carrying his medical bag. "Figured if there's going to be trouble," he said, climbing down from his horse, "you might need someone who knows how to patch up bullet holes." "Doc, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Harrison's face was grim. "I stayed silent when I saw bruises on these children. Told myself it wasn't my business. Well, I'm making it my business now." Before sunset, 4 more people arrived. Sarah brought food enough to feed everyone for 3 days. Another woman Caleb didn't know brought blankets and medical supplies. Even old Father Murphy from the Catholic Church rode up, said he'd come to bear witness and pray for souls. though Caleb noticed he'd brought his shotgun along with his Bible. By nightfall, Caleb wasn't alone anymore. He had 15 people camped around his cabin, keeping watch, ready to fight. Rose stood at the window looking out at all of them. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why are they doing this?" "Because you reminded them what matters," Caleb said. "Sometimes folks forget. They get scared, get selfish, convince themselves that staying safe is more important than doing right. But then something happens, something like a little girl walking through a blizzard to save her baby brother. And it reminds them who they used to be, who they're supposed to be." Rose was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you think Uncle Vernon will still come, with all these people here?" "I don't know. Man like Vernon, when he's cornered, he gets dangerous." As if summoning him with words, they heard it. A sound drifting up from the valley below. Church bells, ringing at the wrong time of day, ringing in a pattern that wasn't right. Miguel came to the door. "That's a signal," he said. "Someone's raising an alarm in town." They all stood there listening to those bells echo through the mountains, each clang sending a chill down Caleb's spine. Then a rider came tearing up the trail. One of Sarah's sons, his horse covered in foam from being pushed too hard. "Fire!" he shouted. "There's a fire in town. The courthouse, it's burning." Caleb's blood went cold. "The courthouse," Miguel said quietly. "That's where they keep all the legal records." "The Morrison estate files," Doc Harrison added. "The documents proving the children's inheritance. The evidence of Vernon's embezzlement." "He's destroying the evidence," Sarah said. But Caleb was thinking something else, something worse. "It's a diversion," he said. "He sets a fire in town, draws the marshal and half the men away to fight it. Then he comes here while we're undermanned." Miguel understood immediately. "Split our forces, make us choose between saving the town and protecting the children." "And while the courthouse burns," Caleb continued, "all the legal proof of his crimes burns with it." Sarah's son was breathing hard. "Marshall's calling for every able-bodied man to help fight the fire. Says the whole town could go up if it spreads to the lumber mill." Miguel looked at Caleb. "If we go help fight that fire, we leave the children exposed." "But if we don't go," Doc Harrison said, "the town burns. People could die." They stood there in terrible silence, each of them knowing they were facing an impossible choice. Save the town or save the children. Vernon had engineered it so they couldn't do both. "I'll stay," Caleb said. "The rest of you go. Help with the fire." "Caleb, you can't defend this place alone." "I can try." "No." Miguel's voice was firm. "We split up. Half go fight the fire, half stay here. We don't abandon either." It was the best compromise they could make, but it still left them vulnerable. 6 men to guard the cabin, 7 to fight the fire. Not enough for either task, but the best they could do. As Miguel picked men for each group, Caleb felt time slowing down, felt the weight of what was coming settle on his shoulders. This was it. Tonight, one way or another, this ended. The men riding to town were mounting up when they saw it. Way down in the valley where the trail from town met the mountain road. Lights. Not torches this time, but lanterns. Moving slow and steady like a funeral procession. Coming up the mountain. Coming for them. "They're here," Caleb said quietly. Miguel looked at the riders coming up the trail, then at the smoke rising from town, then at Caleb. "We can still send everyone. Make a stand here with all 15 men and let the town burn. Let more innocent people die." Caleb shook his head. "No, we do it like we planned. You take your men to town. We'll hold here till you get back. And if you can't hold—" Caleb looked at Rose, standing in the doorway, holding Thomas. "Then I'll go down fighting," he said. "And I'll take as many of them with me as I can." Miguel gripped Caleb's shoulder. "God be with you, my friend. And with you." Caleb watched half their defenders ride toward town, toward the fire, leaving him with 5 men to face whatever was coming up that mountain trail. Inside the cabin, Rose was singing softly to Thomas. The same song she'd been singing in the root cellar that first night. A lullaby. A prayer. Caleb checked his rifle one more time, made sure every round was loaded. The lights kept coming, getting closer with every heartbeat. And somewhere in the distance, those church bells kept ringing, calling good men to fight a fire, while evil men came calling on the innocent. Caleb. Rose's voice was small. Whatever happens, thank you for giving us a home, even if it was only for a little while. It's not over yet, Caleb said. But as he said it, watching those lanterns climb the mountain, he couldn't help but wonder if he was lying to her or to himself. The lanterns stopped 50 yards from the cabin. 10 men on horseback, maybe more in the shadows. And standing at the front, bold as brass, despite his bail conditions, was Vernon Fletcher. Thornton. His voice carried through the cold night air. I'm giving you one last chance. Send out the children, and I'll let you and your friends live. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Behind him, his 5 defenders took positions at the windows. You already tried burning me out once, Vernon. Didn't work then. Won't work now. That was a warning. Vernon gestured to the smoke rising from town. This time I'm not playing games. You've got 5 minutes to send them out or we're coming in. Then come, Caleb shouted back. But I guarantee some of you aren't riding back down this mountain. Caleb saw Vernon's men shift in their saddles, nervous. They'd been hired for a job, but facing a fortified position against determined defenders that wasn't what they'd signed up for. Vernon saw it too, his face twisted with rage. You're all fools, he screamed at his men. There's only 6 of them. We outnumber them 2 to 1, and when we're done, you'll be paid double what I promised. Money talks. The hired guns steadied, hands moving to their weapons. This was it. The moment where everything would be decided by bullets and blood. But then Caleb heard something, the sound of many horses, coming fast, from a different direction, not from town, from the north. Everyone turned to look. Out of the darkness rode Chief Gray Wolf, and behind him at least 30 Blackfoot warriors. They spread out in a line between Vernon's men and Caleb's cabin, creating a wall of horseflesh and humanity. What is the meaning of this? Vernon sputtered. Chief Gray Wolf sat tall in his saddle, his weathered face impassive. These children have claimed tribal protection. Under the Treaty of 1855, anyone with Blackfoot blood who requests sanctuary has the right to tribal jurisdiction. That treaty doesn't apply here. This is territorial land. The children are on this land by choice. They have requested recognition by the tribe. That makes them tribal members, subject to our laws, not yours. Gray Wolf's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of centuries. Your guardianship papers mean nothing to us. This is absurd. Marshal Cooper is bound by federal treaty law, Gray Wolf interrupted. As are you. If you attempt to take these children by force, you commit an act of aggression against the Blackfoot Nation. That is a federal crime. Caleb watched Vernon's face cycle through rage, calculation, desperation. His whole plan was collapsing around him. The courthouse fire had destroyed evidence, sure, but now none of it mattered. Tribal law didn't care about white man's documents. You can't do this, Vernon said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I have rights, legal rights. You have no rights here. Gray Wolf looked past Vernon directly at Caleb. Caleb Thornton, do you accept responsibility for these children under tribal custom? Every eye turned to Caleb. This was it, the moment of no return. If he said yes, he'd be bound by tribal law, subject to their judgment, but he'd also be protected by it, and so would Rose and Thomas. I accept, Caleb said. Gray Wolf nodded. Then it is done. Tomorrow at dawn you will come to our village. The council will hold the trial of 3 questions. If you answer true, the children are yours forever." "And if he fails?" Vernon asked eagerly. "If he can't answer your questions, do the children come back to me?" "No," Grey Wolf said simply. "They become wards of the tribe. You will never see them again either way." Vernon's face went purple. "This is illegal. I'll appeal to the territorial governor. You'll leave." Grey Wolf's voice hardened. "Now, before I decide that your presence here constitutes a threat to tribal members." The Blackfoot warriors raised their rifles as one. Vernon looked at his hired guns, saw them backing away, saw his money and influence meaning nothing in the face of 30 armed warriors and federal treaty law. "This isn't over, Thornton," he spat. "Even if you pass their test, I'll find a way. I always find a way." "Then you'll do it from a jail cell," said a new voice. They all turned. Marshal Cooper was riding up from town, and he wasn't alone. He had Sarah with him, and she was carrying a metal lockbox, the kind used to store important documents. "Before your men set that fire," Cooper said, "Sarah here broke into the courthouse and grabbed the most important files, including the Morrison estate records, including evidence of your embezzlement, including a witness statement from Miguel Santos describing how he saw you sabotage Jacob Fletcher's logging equipment." Vernon went pale. "Vernon Fletcher," Cooper continued, "you're under arrest. Again. And this time, there's not a judge in the territory who'll grant you bail." Caleb watched them put Vernon in chains, watched him scream and threaten and finally break down sobbing as they led him away. All that power, all that influence gone in a moment. When they were gone, when the hired guns had scattered, and Vernon was headed back to jail, Grey Wolf approached Caleb. "The children are safe tonight," he said. "But tomorrow you face the council. The 3 questions are not easy, Caleb Thornton. They are designed to reveal what is in a man's heart. Many have failed them. What happens if I fail? The children go to the tribe. They will be raised in our ways, given Blackfoot names, taught our traditions. They will have a good life." Grey Wolf paused. "But they will not have you." Caleb looked back at the cabin where Rose stood in the doorway holding Thomas, watching them. "Then I better not fail," Caleb said. Grey Wolf turned his horse to leave, then stopped. "Caleb Thornton," he said, "the questions we ask are not about strength or wisdom or wealth. They are about truth. Remember that." After everyone left the warriors, the marshal, the defenders who'd stood with him, the cabin fell silent. Caleb and Rose sat by the fire, neither of them speaking for a long time. Finally, Rose asked, "What are the 3 questions? I don't know." "What if you can't answer them?" "Then you'll go live with Chief Grey Wolf's people. They're good people, Rose. They'll take care of you." "But I want to stay with you," she whispered. "I know." Caleb put his arm around her shoulders. "And I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen." Rose leaned against him, and they sat there watching the fire, both of them knowing that come dawn, everything would change, one way or another. Dawn came cold and clear. Caleb rode to the Blackfoot village alone like Grey Wolf had instructed. The trail wound through pine forests, still heavy with snow. As he climbed higher, he could see smoke rising from the town below, the courthouse still smoldering from last night's fire. Vernon had tried to burn the truth. Instead, he'd only revealed himself. The village was nestled in a valley protected by rock walls on 3 sides. Teepees formed a circle around a central fire. And as Caleb rode in, he saw the entire tribe gathered. Elders, warriors, women, children. All of them there to witness the trial of 3 questions. Chief Grey Wolf stood by the fire, flanked by 6 other elders. Their faces were weathered as old leather eyes, sharp as broken glass. "Caleb Thornton," Grey Wolf said, "you come seeking to adopt children of tribal blood. Our law requires you answer 3 questions with complete truth. Not clever words, not right answers. Truth from your heart. We will know the difference." Caleb dismounted, walked to the fire. The heat felt good against his face, but it was nothing compared to the heat of all those eyes on him. "I'm ready," he said. An elderly woman stepped forward, the oldest person Caleb had ever seen. Her face a map of wrinkles, her eyes still bright as a girl's. "First question," she said. "You lost a wife and son. You grieve them still. Why do you seek to replace them with children who are not yours?" The question hit Caleb like a fist. He'd expected legal questions, practical questions. Not this. He thought about lying, saying something noble about duty or compassion. But Grey Wolf had said truth. So Caleb gave it to him. "I don't seek to replace them," he said slowly. "Margaret and Daniel can't be replaced. Won't ever be replaced. But grief is a canyon, ma'am. You can stand on one side alone, or you can build a bridge and cross it. Rose and Thomas, they're not replacing what I lost. They're the bridge that lets me keep living without forgetting the dead." Caleb paused, feeling the weight of every eye on him. "When my son died, I thought my heart died with him. Thought there was nothing left in me worth giving. But then Rose came walking through that blizzard, offering her life for her brothers, and I realized something. My heart wasn't dead. It was just waiting for someone who needed it as much as I needed to give it." The old woman nodded slowly. "You speak true. The heart knows the difference between filling a hole and healing a wound." She stepped back. A middle-aged man stepped forward next. His face was stern, his eyes hard. "Second question. You are a man of property and independence. Children require sacrifice, of freedom, of resources, of self. Your barn burned, your cattle scattered. Why give what little remains to children who may never call you father?" This one was easier. Caleb had already learned this lesson. "I spent 6 years building a ranch for nobody but myself," he said. "Bigger barns, more cattle, more land. But every night I came home to an empty house. Property without purpose is just things, sir. Just wood and nails and dirt. Rose and Thomas give me a reason to rebuild. Not for me, for them." Caleb looked directly at the man. "And if they grow up and leave, if they never call me father, well, that's how it's supposed to be. Children aren't meant to stay. They're meant to become strong enough to fly. My job isn't to keep them, it's to give them wings." The man's stern expression softened slightly. "You understand parenthood, then. It is the art of holding tight while letting go." He stepped back. Finally, Chief Grey Wolf himself stepped forward. His eyes bored into Caleb's. "Third question, the hardest." Grey Wolf's voice dropped low. "You took these children into your home. You risked everything. Why do not tell me duty? Do not tell me honor. Tell me the deepest truth even if it shames you." This was it. The question that would decide everything. Caleb could feel the whole tribe leaning in waiting, could hear his heart pounding in his chest. He realized then that if he couldn't be honest here, he didn't deserve those children anyway. "Because I failed my own son." Caleb said, his voice cracking. "Daniel got sick. Winter fever, same as Thomas. I rode for medicine same as I did for Thomas. But I was too late. Daniel died while I was gone." Tears were streaming down Caleb's face now, and he didn't wipe them away. "And Margaret, she looked at me with these eyes that forgave me, which was worse than blame. She forgave me, but I never forgave myself. For 6 years I've been carrying that weight, the weight of knowing I failed when it mattered most." Caleb's voice broke completely. "When I saw Rose carrying Thomas through that blizzard, when I saw his blue lips, I saw my second chance, my redemption. I'm not taking them in out of kindness, Chief. I'm not doing it out of charity or duty or any noble reason. I'm taking them in out of desperation. Because if I can save them, maybe I can live with what I couldn't save before. Maybe I can finally forgive myself for failing Daniel." The silence that followed was absolute. Caleb had just confessed his deepest shame in front of 100 people. admitted he was broken, selfish, desperate. Every instinct he had as a man told him he'd just failed the test. Then Chief Gray Wolf did something unexpected. He smiled. "You have answered the 3 questions," he said, "and you have done what no man seeking adoption has ever done before." Caleb braced himself for rejection. "You told the truth, the full truth. Most men give us noble lies. They want children out of love, out of duty, out of strength. You are the first to admit you do it out of brokenness." Gray Wolf placed his hand on Caleb's shoulder, and that Caleb Thornton is the only honest reason to become a father. The old woman stepped forward again. "All parents are broken people trying to raise children better than they were raised. You admit your cracks. Others hide them. We trust a cracked pot that admits it leaks more than a perfect pot that hides its holes." "The council has decided," Gray Wolf announced to the gathered tribe. "The children are yours. May their healing and yours walk the same path." A cheer went up from the tribe, whoops and hollers that echoed off the canyon walls. Caleb stood there in shock, barely believing what he'd heard. He'd passed. They brought Rose and Thomas then. They'd been kept in a nearby lodge waiting for the verdict. When Rose saw Caleb, saw his tears, saw the smiles on the elders' faces, she understood. She ran to him, Thomas, in her arms, and threw herself against his chest. "Papa," she said, the first time she'd called him that. Caleb wrapped his arms around both of them, holding tight. "Yes, daughter. Papa." The tribe began preparing a feast, celebrating the adoption in the traditional way. But as the women built up the fire and the men brought out drums, a rider came tearing into the village. It was one of Sarah's sons, his face pale with fear. "Mr. Thornton," he gasped, sliding off his horse. "You need to come quick. It's Vernon. He escaped." Caleb's blood went cold. "What?" "Last night in the jail. Someone helped him, left the cell door open, gave him a horse. Marshals forming a posse. But—" the boy hesitated. "He was heard saying he's coming for the children. Said if he can't have them legal, nobody will." Gray Wolf's face hardened. "How long has he been free?" "Since midnight. He's got 12 hours head start." Caleb looked down at Rose, saw the fear flood back into her one good eye. They'd won the legal battle, passed the tribal test, done everything right, and Vernon Fletcher was still out there somewhere in the mountains, coming to finish what he'd started. "Take the children to the lodge," Caleb told Gray Wolf. "Keep them safe." "Where are you going?" Caleb checked his rifle, made sure his ammunition was full. "To end this," he said, "one way or another." Gray Wolf nodded to 2 of his warriors. "Go with him. This man has earned our protection." Miguel and Doc Harrison were already mounting up. Sarah's son was turning his horse around. Within minutes, a dozen men were ready to ride. "He'll be heading for high ground," Miguel said. "Trying to get to the territorial line where the marshal can't follow." "Or he's circling back," Doc Harrison said, "coming for the children while we're out looking for him." "Split up," Caleb said. "Half track him north, half stay here. Guard the village." They divided quickly. Caleb took the tracking party. 6 men moving fast through the snow, following the trail Vernon's horse had left. They found him 3 miles from the village. His horse was lame, him on foot, trudging through snow that came up to his knees. He wasn't running toward the children. He was running away. Marshal Cooper rode up beside Caleb, along with Gray Wolf and a dozen warriors. When Vernon saw them, he collapsed in the snow. Didn't even try to fight anymore. "It's over, Vernon," Cooper said, but Vernon just laughed. A broken hollow sound. "Over it was over the moment James married that Blackfoot woman. Over when they had children with tribal blood. I worked for 20 years building that business, and he was going to leave half of it to half-breed children." The slur made Gray Wolf's hand move to his knife, but Caleb held up his hand. "Let him talk," Caleb said. "Let him tell us all of it." And Vernon did. Like a dam breaking, the whole ugly truth poured out. How he'd sabotaged the logging equipment. How he'd planned for James's widow to die too. Slipped something into her medicine that made the childbirth go wrong. How he'd been slowly poisoning the children's food, hoping they'd sicken and die before anyone noticed. "They were supposed to die," Vernon sobbed. "Quiet like accidents. Nobody would have known. The business would have been mine, all mine." He looked up at Caleb with wild eyes. "But that girl wouldn't die. Kept surviving. Kept protecting her brother. I had to get rid of them. Had to." He was confessing to 3 murders and 2 attempted murders right there in the snow, in front of a dozen witnesses. Marshal Cooper was writing it all down. "Why?" Caleb asked. "Why not just buy them out, pay for their shares?" "Because they didn't deserve it," Vernon screamed. "I built that business. My money, my connections. James just had the name and the know-how. Why should his mongrel children inherit what I built?" The word mongrel hung in the cold air. Grey Wolf dismounted slowly, walked to where Vernon knelt in the snow. The old chief looked down at this broken, hateful man, and Caleb saw something in his eyes he didn't expect. Pity. "You murdered for money," Grey Wolf said quietly. "Destroyed lives for property. And now you have neither." He looked at Caleb. "What would you have us do with him, Caleb Thornton? Under tribal law, you have the right to demand justice. His life for the lives he took." Everyone went silent. This was it. The moment where Caleb could demand Vernon's death, and no white man's law could stop it. Tribal justice on tribal land. Caleb thought about Margaret, about his son Daniel, about Rose's parents dead because of this man's greed. Then he thought about Rose and Thomas back in the village, waiting to see what kind of man he was, what kind of father. "No," Caleb said. Marshal Cooper looked surprised. "Caleb, he'll face white man's justice. A trial, a jury, a judge. Everything legal and proper." Caleb looked at Vernon. "Because I won't let him turn me into what he is. I won't let him make my children watch their father become a killer." Grey Wolf nodded slowly. "You choose mercy over revenge. That is the mark of true strength." "It's not mercy," Caleb said. "It's practicality. Every minute I spend hating him is a minute I don't spend loving them. He's had enough of our days. He doesn't get any more." They bound Vernon and put him on a horse. Marshal Cooper would take him to the territorial prison this time. No local jail, no bail, no escape. As they rode back to the village, Grey Wolf rode beside Caleb. "You passed a 4th test today," the chief said. "One we did not ask. The test of knowing when to fight and when to let justice take its course." "I didn't feel like I passed anything. Felt like I was just too tired to hate anymore." "That is wisdom," Grey Wolf said. "The young fight because they have energy. The wise fight only when they must." When they got back to the village, Rose ran out of the lodge. She didn't ask what happened to Vernon, didn't ask if he was dead or alive. She just threw her arms around Caleb and held on. "You came back," she whispered. "Always will," Caleb said. That night the tribe held the feast they'd started to prepare. There was venison and corn and wild berries preserved from summer. There was singing and drumming and dancing. Rose sat close to Caleb the whole time like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. Thomas fell asleep in Caleb's arms, his small body warm and trusting. And Caleb felt something settle in his chest, something that had been broken for 6 years. Peace. The next morning, they rode back to the ranch. Miguel and several others came with them, started clearing the burned barn, started making plans to rebuild. "We'll help," Miguel said. "All of us. You stood up for what was right. We stand with you now." Over the next few weeks, the whole town seemed to wake up. People Caleb hadn't spoken to in years came by with supplies, with labor, with apologies. Sarah brought fabric for new dresses for Rose. Doc Harrison came by twice a week to check on Thomas refusing payment. Even Marshal Cooper stopped by, said he'd testified at Vernon's trial. said the judge had sentenced Vernon to hang for murder. "You want to be there?" Cooper asked. "For the execution." "No," Caleb said. "Got better things to do. Better things like teaching Rose how to ride a horse, like watching Thomas take his first steps, like rebuilding a barn with men who'd become friends." 3 months later, spring came to Montana. The snow melted. Wildflowers pushed up through the mud. And one warm April morning, Judge Morrison himself rode up to the ranch. He had papers in his saddlebag. Legal papers. The official adoption documents. "Took some doing," Morrison said, spreading the papers on Caleb's table. "Had to get tribal approval, territorial approval, and federal approval because of the treaty law, but it's done." He smiled. "Sign here." Caleb signed. Rose watched her one good eye shining. "What are their names?" Morrison asked. "Rose Margaret Thornton," Caleb said, "and Thomas Daniel Thornton." Morrison wrote carefully. "You honored your dead by naming the living after them. That's a good thing." "Chief Gray Wolf's idea," Caleb admitted. "Said in his tradition you honor ancestors by carrying their names forward." Morrison finished writing, pressed his seal into the wax, and handed the papers to Caleb. "Congratulations," he said. "You're officially a father again." After Morrison left, Caleb took the children up to the hilltop where Margaret and his son were buried. They'd added 2 more markers for Jacob and Grace Fletcher. "I want you to know your first parents," Caleb told Rose. "They loved you, and they'd be proud of who you're becoming." Rose touched her mother's grave marker. "Do you think they mind that we call you Papa now?" Caleb looked at the 4 graves, thought about how much death it had taken to teach him how to live again. "I think they sent you to me," he said. "I think your mama and my Margaret worked something out up there. Maybe our family was always supposed to be bigger than we thought." Thomas, walking now, nearly a year old, toddled over and put his chubby hand on Caleb's boot. Caleb picked him up and Thomas laughed, reaching for his beard. "Come on," Caleb said. "Let's go home." As they walked down the hill toward the cabin where smoke curled from the chimney and the new barn stood strong against the sky, Rose slipped her hand into Caleb's. "Papa," she said, "do you still miss them? Your first family." "Every day," Caleb admitted. "But missing them and loving you aren't opposite things, daughter. A heart can hold both." Rose squeezed his hand. "Good, because I miss my first mama and papa too. But I love you just as much." From the cabin, Caleb could see people gathering. Miguel and his family. Sarah. Doc Harrison. They'd started having Sunday dinners together. This odd collection of people who'd found courage in each other. Chief Gray Wolf was there too. Had become a regular visitor. Said he liked seeing how his adopted grandson Thomas was growing up in both worlds. White and Blackfoot. "You know what the tribe calls you," Gray Wolf had told Caleb last week. "What's that broken shield? The man who admits his cracks and protects others anyway." Caleb liked that name. Felt true. As they reached the cabin, Rose looked up at Caleb one more time. "Are you happy, Papa? Really happy?" Caleb looked at her, this one-eyed girl who'd walked through a blizzard to save her brother. Looked at Thomas giggling in his arms. Looked at the community gathered around his table, celebrating life instead of hoarding it. "Yeah, daughter," he said. "I really am." That night, after everyone left and the children were asleep, Caleb stood on his porch looking at the stars. The mountains rose dark against the sky, and somewhere out there spring was melting the last of winter's snow. He thought about Vernon sitting in a jail cell waiting for a rope. Thought about how close he'd come to letting that man's hatred poison his second chance at family. But he'd chosen different. Chosen to build instead of destroy. Chosen to love instead of hate. Chosen to be the kind of father his children deserved, not the kind of man his enemy wanted him to become. And that, Caleb figured, was the best revenge of all. Inside, he heard Rose singing Thomas to sleep. The same lullaby she'd been singing that first night, when he found them half frozen in his barn. But this time her voice wasn't scared or desperate. It was home. Vernon Fletcher was hanged on a Tuesday morning in late April. Caleb didn't go. Didn't need to see it. The man was already dead to him. Instead, Caleb spent that morning teaching Rose how to plant a garden, showing her where to put the seeds, how deep, how far apart. Thomas sat in the dirt nearby, playing with rocks and laughing. "Papa," Rose said, "do you think Uncle Vernon ever loved anything?" Caleb thought about that. "I think he loved the idea of success, the idea of power, but I don't think he ever loved a person, not really. And that's the saddest thing about him." "Why?" "Because love is the only thing worth having. Everything else, money, property, power, it all turns to dust eventually. But love, that's the thing that survives. That's what we leave behind." Rose was quiet for a moment, patting dirt over a seed. "I'm glad you love us," she said softly. "Me too, daughter. Me too." Years later, when Caleb was an old man and Rose had children of her own, and Thomas ran the ranch better than Caleb ever had, people would ask him about that winter, about the blizzard and the fire and the trial and Vernon Fletcher. And Caleb would tell them the truth, that he'd been a dead man for 6 years, that he'd built a life that looked fine from the outside, but was empty inside, that he'd forgotten how to be human, until a 9-year-old girl walked through hell to save her brother, and in saving them, she'd saved him too. "Folks sometimes ask me if I regret it," Caleb would say, sitting in his rocking chair with great-grandchildren at his feet. "Fighting Vernon, burning my barn, risking everything for 2 children I'd just met." He'd pause, looking out at the mountains. "And I tell them the same thing every time. Regret is for time wasted. I didn't waste a single moment." Because the frontier teaches you something real fast. You can build the biggest ranch, the finest herd, the most impressive property in 3 counties. But if you do it alone, you've built nothing. Just a museum for one. Family isn't about blood. It's about who you'd walk through a blizzard for, who you'd let your barn burn for, who you'd stand in front of hired guns for. That's family. And as Caleb Thornton grew old, surrounded by the family he'd chosen and who'd chosen him back, he understood something his wife Margaret had tried to tell him years ago. God breaks our hearts so he can fit more love inside. Caleb didn't know his heart had been broken until it started to heal. The first real sign came on a Sunday morning, 2 months after the adoption papers were signed. Rose was in the kitchen making breakfast she'd insisted on learning, said she wanted to help, and Thomas was babbling in his high chair, banging a wooden spoon against the table. Caleb was sitting there watching them, and suddenly he realized something. He was smiling. Really smiling. Not the polite half-smile he'd been wearing for 6 years like a mask. A real smile that came from somewhere deep in his chest. "What's funny, Papa?" Rose asked, looking up from the eggs she was scrambling. "Nothing's funny," Caleb said. "Everything's just right." Rose beamed at him, and Caleb felt that warmth in his chest expand. This was what living felt like. He'd almost forgotten. But healing doesn't come easy, and it doesn't come all at once. There were hard days too. Days when Rose woke up screaming from nightmares about Vernon. Days when she'd flinch if Caleb moved too fast. Days when she'd hoard food in her pockets again, forgetting she was safe now. "I'm sorry," she'd whisper on those days. "I know I shouldn't." "You got nothing to apologize for," Caleb would tell her. "Healing takes time. We got plenty of that." And they did. They had time and patience and each other. Slowly, Rose's nightmares came less often. She stopped flinching, started to trust that there would always be food tomorrow, started to believe she deserved to take up space in the world. Thomas grew strong and healthy. His laugh filled the house. He started calling Caleb Papa, clear as day, and every time he did, Caleb felt something knit back together inside him. The ranch grew too. Miguel became Caleb's partner in the logging business, Turned out Jacob Fletcher's shares came to the children, and when Rose was old enough to sign papers, she'd made Miguel co-owner. Said her father would have wanted it that way. The business thrived. But more than that, it became something good. Something honest. Miguel made sure the workers were paid fair, made sure the equipment was safe, made sure nobody else died because someone decided profit was worth more than human life. Sarah's store expanded. Doc Harrison trained a young assistant. Marshall Cooper retired and settled into a quiet life, said he'd seen enough of man's ugliness to last him forever. And Chief Gray Wolf kept his promise. Thomas learned both worlds, spent summers with the tribe learning Blackfoot ways, spent winters on the ranch learning frontier ways. Grew up belonging to two families instead of one. Rose bloomed in ways Caleb never expected. She learned to read and write, not just simple words, but real reading, the kind that opened up worlds. She'd sit by the fire at night with books borrowed from the traveling library, devouring stories about places she'd never seen. "Papa," she said one evening when she was 12, looking up from a book, "do you think I could be a teacher someday?" "Why wouldn't you be?" "Because of my eye. Because I'm damaged." Caleb set down the harness he was mending and looked at her. "Rose, listen to me. That scar on your eye, that's not damage. That's proof you survived. There's a difference." "But people stare." "Let them stare. You walked 12 miles through a blizzard carrying your brother when you were 9 years old. You stood up to a murderer. You chose love over fear every single day since. That scar just means you're strong enough to bear the mark of what you survived." Rose was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You really believe that?" "I know that." 2 years later, Rose started teaching at the schoolhouse in Blue Ridge. She was 14, teaching children not much younger than herself. Some parents complained at first, too young, too inexperienced, too scarred. But Rose proved them wrong. She had patience with the slow learners because she remembered being scared. She had gentleness with the troubled ones because she'd been troubled herself. And she never ever made a child feel less than whole. Within a year, parents were asking specifically for their children to be in Miss Rose's classroom. Thomas grew into a quiet, steady boy. He had his father Jacob's way with wood, could look at a tree and know exactly how it wanted to be cut. Had his mother Grace's kindness, never walked past someone in need without stopping. "Papa," Thomas said one day when he was 8, "why do some people say mean things about me and Rose about us being half-breed?" Caleb had been dreading this question, hoping it wouldn't come. But of course it came. Hate always finds its way to children eventually. "Who said that to you?" "Some boys in town said we're not really white, not really Indian, said we don't belong nowhere." Caleb knelt down so he was eye level with Thomas. "You listen to me. Those boys are wrong. You belong everywhere. You got the best of both worlds in you, your mama's people and your papa's people. That doesn't make you half of anything. It makes you double." "But they said—" "I don't care what they said. I care what's true. And the truth is, you're Thomas Daniel Thornton. You're my son. You're Chief Gray Wolf's grandson. You're loved by 2 families, and you carry 2 proud traditions in your blood. Anybody who can't see how lucky that makes you is just small-minded and scared." Thomas thought about that. "Are you scared, Papa?" "Of what?" "Of me and Rose leaving someday. Going away." Caleb pulled Thomas into a hug. "Every parent's scared of that. But that's how it's supposed to work. I raise you strong enough to fly, and then I let you go. That's the deal." "But what if I don't want to leave?" "Then you stay. But if you do want to leave, you go with my blessing. Always." Thomas squeezed tighter. "I don't want to leave." "That's fine too, son. That's fine too." Years passed. Rose turned 18 and started courting a young man from the tribe, Gray Wolf's nephew's son. A quiet boy who looked at Rose like she hung the moon. Caleb approved, though it hurt somewhere deep to think of Rose leaving. But that was parenthood, loving someone enough to let them build their own life. The wedding was held at the ranch, combining white and Blackfoot traditions. Caleb walked Rose down between the chairs, And when the young man took her hand, Caleb saw Jacob Fletcher in Rose's smile, saw Grace Fletcher in her gentle strength. "Your parents would be proud," Caleb whispered before stepping back. "All four of them," Rose whispered back, squeezing his hand. Thomas stayed on the ranch, took over more and more of the daily work as Caleb got older. Brought home a girl eventually, a logger's daughter with a spine of steel and a laugh that rang like bells. They married young and built a house on the far end of Caleb's property. Within 2 years, Caleb was a grandfather. The first time Rose put her baby daughter in Caleb's arms, he felt something break open all over again. New grief for the grandchildren he'd never had with Margaret and Daniel. New joy for these grandchildren he did have. "What are you naming her?" Caleb asked, looking down at the tiny face. "Margaret," Rose said. "If that's all right with you." Caleb couldn't speak for a moment, just nodded. "And her middle name is Morning Dove," Rose continued. "For my grandmother, the one I never met." "That's perfect," Caleb managed. "That's just perfect." More grandchildren came. Rose had 4 children. Thomas had 3. The ranch filled with noise and laughter and chaos. Filled with life. Caleb taught them all the things his father had taught him. How to gentle a horse. How to read the weather. How to know when to fight and when to walk away. How to be strong without being cruel. But more than that, he taught them what he'd learned from Rose and Thomas. That family isn't about blood. That broken things can be beautiful. That the greatest strength is admitting you need help. That love is the only thing that survives. On Caleb's 70th birthday, the whole family gathered at the ranch. Rose and Thomas, their spouses, their children. Miguel and his family. Sarah and hers. Doc Harrison's apprentice, who'd taken over his practice. Chief Gray Wolf, ancient now, but still sharp-eyed. They had a feast that lasted all day. Food and music and stories. As the sun set, Rose stood up and tapped her glass. "I want to say something," she said, "about the man who saved us." "Rose, you don't have to," Caleb started, but she shook her head. "Yes, I do. Because people need to know." Rose looked around at all the faces gathered. "When I was 9 years old, I thought I was worthless. I thought my scarred eye made me damaged goods. I thought the best thing I could do was die so my brother could live. And then this man," she pointed at Caleb. "This stubborn, broken, grieving man looked at me and said no. Said I was worth saving. Said I was worth fighting for." Her voice cracked. "He fought a rich man. Fought the law. Fought hired guns. Let his barn burn. Risked everything. For a girl he didn't know and a baby that wasn't his. And he did it not because he was whole, but because he was broken. Because he understood that broken people can still love, can still protect, can still build something beautiful." Rose walked over and knelt beside Caleb's chair. "You gave me a life, Papa. You gave Thomas a life. You gave all these grandchildren a life they wouldn't have had. And you did it by choosing love over hate, by choosing to build instead of destroy, by choosing to be brave when you were terrified." She took his hand. "I want everyone here to know that Caleb Thornton is the best man I've ever known. Not because he's perfect, but because he admits he's not." The whole crowd stood and applauded. Caleb sat there with tears running down his weathered face, overwhelmed. Thomas stood next. "I want to add something," he said. "I don't remember much from before Papa took us in. I was too young. But I remember the feeling. I remember being cold and scared, and knowing something was very wrong. And then I remember being warm and safe and loved." Thomas looked at Caleb. "That's what you gave us, Papa. Not just safety, love. The kind that doesn't ask for anything back. The kind that just gives and trusts that somehow it's enough." Chief Gray Wolf stood, then old and bent, but still commanding respect. "I have seen many men in my 73 winters," the chief said. "Strong men, brave men, rich men, wise men. But I have rarely seen a good man. Caleb Thornton is a good man, not because he never falls, but because he always gets back up, not because he never breaks, but because he lets his crack show light through. Grey Wolf raised his glass. To Caleb Thornton, who proved that the greatest strength is not in never needing help, but in asking for it. The greatest courage is not in never being afraid, but in acting despite fear. And the greatest love is not in never losing, but in risking loss again. To Papa, Rose said. To Papa, Thomas echoed. To Caleb. Everyone shouted and drank. That night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Caleb sat on his porch. The same porch where he'd stood that night years ago, watching Vernon's men come with torches. The same porch where he'd made the decision to fight. Rose came out and sat beside him. She was 33 now, mother of 4, teacher to dozens. But in the moonlight, Caleb could still see the 9-year-old girl who'd walked through a blizzard. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," Caleb said. "Nothing. How fast it all went. Do you have regrets?" Caleb thought about that. About the barn he'd lost, the quiet life he'd given up, the safety he'd sacrificed. "No," he said. "Not a single one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Rose said, "Papa, I need to tell you something. Something I never told you." "What's that?" "That night, in the blizzard. When I was walking to your ranch carrying Thomas. I almost gave up. About a mile from your property, I fell in the snow and I couldn't get up. I was so cold, so tired, and I thought, this is it. This is where we die." Caleb's chest tightened. "But then I heard something. A voice. And Papa, I know this sounds crazy, but it sounded like Mama. And she said, 'Get up, Rose, just a little farther. He's waiting.' And somehow I got up, kept walking. Found your barn." Rose looked at Caleb. "I've always wondered if I really heard her, or if it was just my mind playing tricks because I was dying. But now, after all these years, I think maybe Mama did speak to me. I think maybe she and your Margaret worked something out, sent us to each other because we all needed saving." Caleb felt tears on his cheeks again. "I think you're right," he said. "I think they knew we couldn't do it alone, so they gave us each other." Rose leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you, Papa, for everything. Thank you, daughter, for saving my life." "I didn't save your life. I was just a scared kid." "You saved my life," Caleb repeated firmly. "You reminded me what it means to be human, what it means to love, what it means to fight for something beyond yourself. Without you and Thomas, I'd have died alone in an empty house and nobody would have mourned. You gave me a life worth living, a family worth fighting for, a reason to wake up every morning." He squeezed her hand. "So yes, daughter, you saved me, just as much as I saved you." They sat there until the moon was high and the air turned cold. Finally, Rose stood. "Come inside, Papa. It's late." "In a minute. I want to sit a while longer." Rose kissed his forehead and went inside. Caleb stayed on the porch looking at the stars. He thought about Vernon Fletcher, dead now for 20 years. Thought about how close Vernon had come to winning. How close hate had come to destroying everything. But love had won instead. Not because it was stronger. Not because it was easier. But because Caleb and Rose and Thomas and everyone else had chosen it. Every day. Even when it was hard. Even when it was terrifying. Even when it seemed impossible. They'd chosen love, and love had chosen them back. Caleb Thornton died in his sleep at the age of 78. Surrounded by family. Surrounded by love. At his funeral, Rose stood to speak. She was 51 now, gray in her hair but still teaching, still strong. "My father once told me that family isn't about blood," she said. "It's about who you'd walk through a blizzard for. And I want everyone here to know that Caleb Thornton walked through blizzards for us every single day. Not literal ones, maybe, but the hard days, the scary days, the days when it would have been easier to give up. He walked through all of those carrying us on his shoulders. She looked at the coffin. People ask me sometimes how I survived what Vernon Fletcher did to us. How I grew up normal after everything. And the truth is, I didn't survive it alone. I survived it because one man decided I was worth saving. One man decided that his broken heart still had room for two broken children. One man decided that love was stronger than fear. Rose's voice strengthened. Caleb Thornton was not a perfect man. He was scared and grieving, and sometimes he didn't know what to do. But he showed up anyway. He loved us anyway. He fought for us anyway. And that's what made him perfect for us. She wiped her eyes. So Papa, wherever you are now, I hope you're with Margaret and Daniel. I hope you're telling them about us. About the grandchildren and great-grandchildren you got to know. About the family that grew from your broken heart. And I hope you know that you did it. You took two children who had nothing and you gave them everything. You took a broken family and you made it whole. Thomas stood next and said his piece. Then the grandchildren. Then friends from town and the tribe. Everyone had a story about Caleb. About his quiet kindness. His stubborn courage. His refusal to let the world make him bitter. They buried him next to Margaret and Daniel. Next to Jacob and Grace Fletcher. 5 graves in a row on the hilltop overlooking the ranch he'd built and rebuilt and built again. Rose and Thomas stood there after everyone left looking at the graves. He did good, Thomas said quietly. He did better than good, Rose replied. He showed us how to turn pain into purpose, how to turn loss into love, how to take a broken heart and use it to heal other broken hearts. Think he knew how much he meant to us. I told him every chance I got. I hope that was enough. They stood there in silence, wind rustling through the grass. Finally, Rose said, "Come on, we should get back. Lots of people at the house." "You go ahead. I want to stay a minute." Rose squeezed Thomas's shoulder and walked down the hill. Thomas knelt by Caleb's fresh grave and put his hand on the earth. "Thank you, Papa," he whispered, "for everything. For fighting for us, for loving us, for teaching us how to be strong and gentle at the same time, for showing us that broken things can still be beautiful." He stood, wiped his eyes, and walked back toward the ranch house full of family. Years later, Rose's great-granddaughter would ask her about the scars. About the one on her eye. About the ones that couldn't be seen. "Did they hurt?" the little girl asked. "Yes," Rose said honestly. "They hurt very much." "Do they still hurt?" Rose thought about that. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But not as much as they used to, because I learned something important. Scars don't have to be ugly. They can be proof that you survived. Proof that you healed. Proof that you're stronger than whatever tried to break you." The little girl touched Rose's scarred eye gently. "Will I get scars?" "Probably. Life gives everyone scars eventually." "I'm scared." Rose pulled the child close. "That's okay. Being scared is normal. But here's the secret: you don't have to face your scars alone. You'll have family, people who love you, people who'll walk through blizzards for you. And when you have that, scars don't seem quite so scary. Did you have people like that? I did. I had a man who chose to be my father when he didn't have to be. Who fought for me when the whole world said I wasn't worth fighting for. Who taught me that love is the strongest thing in the world. Stronger than hate. Stronger than fear. Stronger than anything. Where is he now?" Rose looked toward the window, toward the hilltop where 5 graves stood. "He's with the people he loved, waiting for the rest of us. And when my time comes, I'll see him again. And I'll tell him thank you one more time. For everything." The little girl was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I hope I'm brave like you when I grow up." "You will be," Rose said, "because you come from a long line of people who chose love over fear, who chose courage over comfort, who chose to build instead of destroy. That's in your blood now. That's your inheritance." And it was true. Caleb Thornton's legacy wasn't land or money or property. It was love. The kind that spreads like ripples in a pond, reaching farther and wider with each generation. The kind that turns broken people into healers. The kind that proves over and over that choosing love is always the right choice, even when it's the hardest one. Because in the end, love is all that survives. Everything else turns to dust. But the love you give, the lives you touch, the courage you inspire, that goes on forever. That was Caleb Thornton's truth, and it became Rose's truth, and Thomas's truth, and the truth of every person who learned from them that broken hearts can still love broken people, can still heal, and broken families can still become whole. All it takes is one person brave enough to say yes when the world says no. One person willing to walk through a blizzard. One person who chooses love even when hate seems easier. Caleb Thornton was that person. And because of him, dozens more learned to be that person too. And the circle kept growing, generation after generation, spreading courage like seeds on the wind. That's how you change the world. Not with grand gestures or perfect plans, but with small acts of love repeated over and over until they become a legacy, until they become truth, until they become the only thing that matters. And in that Montana valley surrounded by mountains and memories, Caleb Thornton's truth lived on in the ranch that still stood in the family, that still gathered in the stories that were still told, and in the hearts of everyone who learned that love is always worth fighting for. Always.